History remembers the miracles. It remembers the water turned to wine, the healing of the blind, and the Sermon on the Mount. But what of the 18 years erased from the parchment? What of the young stoneworker who wandered the jagged wilderness of Judea before the world knew his name? Behind the sacred verses lies a darker oral tradition, stories whispered by ancient masons and desert dwellers. They speak of a young Joshua who did not just pray, but who descended into the literal bowels of the earth to face the raw, unrefined terrors of the abyss. This is not the Sunday school story you were told. This is the account of the light meeting the primal darkness in the caves of the ancient Levant. Close your eyes. Hear the dripping of water on cold limestone. Feel the grip of a hand that has been dead for centuries. This is the forbidden chronicle of Joshua, and the secrets hidden in the mouth of the mountain. Part 1. The Blood Quarry of Galilee. In the hills overlooking the Sea of Galilee, where the soil is as red as iron and the limestone as white as bone, a young Joshua worked the quarries. He was a man of immense physical strength, his shoulders broad from hauling blocks for the Roman amphitheaters, his hands calloused and scarred. Yet, his eyes held a depth that unsettled his fellow workers, a look of someone who saw through the stone into the very soul of the world. One sweltering afternoon, near the ruins of an abandoned mine from the era of the Hasmoneans, the workers discovered a new opening. It was a vertical shaft, descending into a darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the sunlight at its edge. The older masons crossed themselves and whispered of Sheol, the place of the forgotten dead. But curiosity is a heavy burden for the young. A group of 4 young men, including a headstrong Judean named Eli, dared Joshua to descend. "If the spirit of the Creator is with you, Joshua," Eli mocked, "then the dark has no teeth to bite you. Go down and tell us if the gold of the ancients still glitters in the mud." Joshua said nothing. He tied a coarse hemp rope around his waist, gripped the jagged edge of the shaft, and began his descent. As he lowered himself, the air changed. The warmth of the Galilean sun vanished, replaced by a damp, cloying chill that smelled of stagnant water and old copper. Halfway down, it happened. Joshua's foot, searching for a ledge, felt something wrap around his ankle. It wasn't the roughness of stone or the friction of the rope. It was cold, wet, and possessed a terrifying, rhythmic grip. 5 fingers. A sudden, violent jerk pulled him downward. The rope burned through his palms, the skin peeling away as he plummeted 10 feet into the muck of the cave floor. He lay there in the suffocating blackness. His breath came in ragged gasps. His left leg was twisted, and a jagged piece of flint had sliced a deep gash into his right forearm. The blood, warm and thick, flowed over the cold floor. Joshua reached for his small oil lamp, his fingers trembling from the shock. When the wick finally caught fire, the flickering yellow light revealed a nightmare. He was not alone. Along the walls of the quarry were the hungry spirits, the shades of laborers who had been buried alive in a massive collapse decades prior. They were not fully ghosts, nor were they fully flesh. They were echoes of agony, their bodies made of gray dust and dried blood. One of them, a figure with a crushed skull and empty eye sockets, was still crouching by Joshua's feet, its hands stained with the fresh blood of the Messiah. From above, Eli's voice echoed down, thin and distant. "Joshua, are you alive?" We saw the rope snap. Joshua looked at the spirit. He felt its hunger, a hunger not for bread, but for the life force that pulsed through his veins. The entity opened its mouth, but no sound came out, only a cloud of fine, gray silt. Joshua did not scream. He did not beg. He stood up, his injured leg groaning under the weight, and he held his lamp high. "You seek the warmth of the living to hide from the cold of your end." Joshua spoke, his voice echoing with a resonance that shook the stalactites. "But you cannot steal what must be given. I see your pain. I see the stones that crushed your breath. But I am the stone that the builders rejected, and in my presence, you must remember the light you once came from." The spirit recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. The flickering lamp in Joshua's hand began to glow with a brilliance that surpassed oil and wick. The gray entity began to dissolve, its form weeping back into the mud of the cave. "I cannot stay," Joshua shouted to the men above. "The air is thin, and the earth remembers its dead. Watch me, do not turn your eyes away." As Joshua began to climb the vertical wall, using his bare, bloody hands to find purchase in the cracks, he realized his friends were failing. Two of them, terrified by the groans emerging from the shaft, dropped their torches and fled into the woods. Only Eli remained, his face pale and sweating, staring down into the abyss. Just as Joshua's hand reached the lip of the cave, Eli's eyes widened. He saw something Joshua couldn't, a massive, bloody figure of a man standing directly behind Joshua, its shadow looming over the young savior. Eli let out a strangled cry, pulled Joshua up with a strength born of pure terror, and the two of them sprinted down the mountain without looking back. That night, Joshua's mother, Mary, washed his wounds with hyssop and salt. The pain was like a descent into Gehenna, the salt stinging the raw flesh. She whispered of the old mine, how it was a place where the accursed dwelt. Joshua looked at his scarred palms, the first of many scars he would bear, and he understood. The caves were not just holes in the ground. They were the places where the world hid its sins, and he was the one who would eventually have to go down and bring them all into the sun. The darkness had tasted his blood, and it wanted more. Part 2. The Moaning Vaults of the Forgotten War. Years passed, and the fame of Joshua's skill as a mason spread from Nazareth to the outskirts of Jerusalem. He was no longer just a boy, he was a man who walked with a quiet, terrifying authority. Yet, the shadows of the earth continued to seek him, on a journey toward the holy city to find work for the Passover season. Joshua was accompanied by a young Lukat traveler named Silas. The road they took was the ancient path through the Valley of Thorns, a place scarred by the Roman-Jewish wars. Along the limestone cliffs, there were hundreds of man-made caves, Phong Kong Kodai, ancient bunkers, where the zealot rebels and terrified families had hidden during the Roman purges. As they neared a particular cave entrance, Silas stopped. "Master Joshua," he whispered, "they say this cave is a mouth that never closes. During the siege, 50 souls fled in there to escape the 10th Legion. The Romans didn't go in. They simply walled it up with boulders and watched. They listened to the screaming for 3 days, then silence for 40 years." Joshua looked at the entrance. The air surrounding the cave was stagnant, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made the teeth ache. Silas, driven by a mixture of morbid curiosity and a hidden greed for rumored rebel gold, took a step forward. "They say the bones are still there, Joshua, untouched, unburied." As Silas reached the threshold, a sudden, unnatural chill swept out from the darkness, turning his breath into a white mist in the desert heat. Joshua felt it instantly, a tacky, malignant aura, so thick it felt like walking through deep water. "Silas, stay back," Joshua warned, his voice like the low roll of thunder. "The dead here do not rest. They are still hungry." But Silas, possessed by a sudden, frantic bravery, ignored him. He stepped into the darkness. Within seconds, the atmosphere changed. The silence was replaced by a sound that chilled the marrow, a collective, rhythmic moaning, not of one voice, but of 50, all gasping for a breath they could no longer take. "Joshua, help me," Silas screamed. Joshua rushed in. In the dim light of the fading sun, he saw Silas being dragged toward the back of the cave, but there was no one pulling him. Instead, a cluster of Bante Denkit, pitch-black hands, formed from the very soot and shadows of the cave walls, had latched onto Silas's ankles and waist. These were the manifestations of the starving dead, souls who had died in such agony that their essence had fused with the stone. Joshua reached Silas and grabbed his hand. The strength of the shadows was immense, pulling with the weight of a mountain. Joshua planted his feet on the dusty floor and looked into the pitch-black void at the back of the cave. "You were abandoned by the world," Joshua shouted, his voice filling the vault with a divine resonance that cracked the dry earth. "You died in the dark, forgotten by the kings of men. But I am the breath of life. Release this man, for he is not the one who caged you." The moaning turned into a piercing shriek of rage. The black hands tightened, their grip bruising Silas's flesh. Joshua didn't use a weapon. He closed his eyes and allowed the An Sang Tonkiat, holy light, from within his soul to radiate outward. It wasn't a soft glow, it was a blinding, searing heat that illuminated the cave's deepest secrets. In that light, the horror was revealed. The walls were covered in scratch marks where the trapped people had clawed at the stone until their fingernails fell off. In the corner, a pile of white bones lay scattered, but they were twitching, trying to reassemble in the presence of the Messiah's power. The shadows burned under Joshua's light. The black hands dissolved into ash. Silas fell forward, gasping for air, but as they turned to flee, a singular, massive entity emerged from the back, a silhouette of an old man. His ribs protruding, his mouth open in a permanent silent scream of hunger. He reached for Joshua's cloak, his fingers turning to smoke the moment they touched the sacred fabric. "Go," Joshua commanded Silas. "Do not look back." They burst out of the cave into the cooling evening air. Silas was shaking so violently he could barely stand. "I saw them, Joshua. I saw their eyes. They weren't just dead, they were hollow." Joshua looked back at the cave entrance. He knew the truth that Silas could not comprehend. These were not just ghosts, they were the unhallowed records of human cruelty. He looked at the bread in his travel pack and thought of the 50 who had eaten their own sandals before the end. "The world builds its cities on top of such caves," Joshua said, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow. "They think that by walling up the past, they are safe, but the earth remembers every drop of blood. One day, Silas, I will have to open every cave in the world and face what is inside. And on that day, there will be no more hunger." As they walked away, the moaning from the cave didn't stop. But it changed. It was no longer a sound of hunger, but a long, low sob of recognition. The darkness had met its master, and it was now waiting for the appointed time. Part 3. The Mud-Clad Scholar of Mount Hermon. The years of Joshua's youth were spent not only in the bustling markets of Jerusalem but also in the high, treacherous altitudes of the north. In the shadow of Mount Hermon, a place ancient even to the ancients, the air is thin and the limestone is honeycombed with vertical crevices that seem to lead directly into the foundations of the world. While working on a project to fortify a mountain outpost for the local governors, Joshua heard the legend of the lost sage. Decades ago, a brilliant scholar from the great library had wandered into a narrow fissure in the rock, seeking a legendary vein of sapphire. He was never seen again. The locals believed the mountain had swallowed him whole, turned him into a pillar of salt or stone as punishment for his curiosity. One afternoon, while measuring a limestone wall, Joshua's foot slipped into a hidden gap, a K-nut crevice, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. A strange, rhythmic clicking sound drifted up from the depths, like a heartbeat against stone. Ignoring the warnings of his fellow masons, Joshua squeezed into the darkness. He descended through a passage so tight the rock scraped his chest and back. A claustrophobic tunnel that led him deep into a hidden chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the mineral tang of standing water. When Joshua finally found a space wide enough to stand, he lit a torch. The light revealed a horrific sight. In the corner of the small, 1.5 ping, approximately 5 square meters space, sat a figure. At first, it looked like a crude Hin Nyan Bang Bun, mudman, a statue molded from the gray, calcified silt of the mountain. But as Joshua stepped closer, the light glinted off something unmistakably human. Resting on the statue's face was a pair of primitive Kin Dong, bronze-rimmed spectacles, their lenses caked with dust but still clear. This was no statue, it was the remains of the scholar. Over the decades, the mineral-rich water dripping from the ceiling had slowly encased his body in a layer of limestone and mud, mummifying him in a standing position. But the horror was not in the corpse itself, it was in what Joshua saw around it. In the scholar's hand was a stub of a candle, melted into his palm. Joshua closed his eyes and, through his divine Tao Te clairvoyance, he felt the man's final days. He saw the scholar's candle flicker and die. He felt the absolute, crushing darkness of the mountain, a darkness so thick it felt like a physical weight on the lungs. He heard the scholar's frantic, bloody fingers clawing at the walls, searching for a way out that didn't exist. For days, the man had sat in that silence, breathing in the damp air, staring through his spectacles into a void until his mind shattered and his heart stopped. The greatest fear of man, Joshua whispered into the silence, is to be forgotten in the dark. Suddenly, the mudman shifted. The limestone casing cracked with a sound like a bone breaking. The scholar's head tilted toward Joshua. From behind the bronze glasses, a pair of hollow, dark sockets seemed to fixate on the Messiah. A voice, dry as parchment and cold as the grave, echoed through the chamber. Why have you brought light here? After 40 years, I had finally become one with the dark. Joshua did not recoil. He stepped forward and placed his warm, living hand on the cold, mud-caked shoulder of the corpse. I have not brought light to mock you, Joshua said, his voice vibrating through the rock. I have come to tell you that the dark is not your home. You were lost in the mountain of man, but you were found in the house of the Creator. As Joshua spoke, the mineral casing began to disintegrate. The mud fell away in large chunks, revealing the white, brittle bones beneath. The bronze spectacles fell to the floor with a hollow clang. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the chamber lifted, replaced by a sudden, cool breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. Joshua gathered the remains and the spectacles, carrying them back up through the narrow crevice. When he emerged into the sunlight, his face was streaked with gray mud and his hands were trembling. He gave the remains to the local elders, insisting on a proper burial in the sun-drenched earth. He understood now. Some people are trapped in caves of stone, but many more are trapped in the caves of their own minds, staring through lenses of logic into a darkness they cannot escape. He looked up at the peak of Mount Hermon, white with snow, and knew that his path would lead him into even deeper darkness, a darkness where he would be the only light for the entire world. The mystery of why the mud never covered the spectacles remained a topic of gossip among the Masons. But Joshua knew. The scholar had kept his eyes open until the very end, waiting for the light, and finally, the light had come. Part 4. The Nameless Shade of the Nazareth Thickets. During the late years of his youth, before the Spirit led him into the wilderness, Joshua returned to the outskirts of Nazareth. It was a time of heavy rains, the Mwah rainy season, that turned the limestone hills into slick, treacherous slopes. One afternoon, while wandering the familiar valleys where he had played as a child, Joshua encountered a group of younger boys and girls. They were huddled near a dense thicket of carob trees, their faces a mixture of excitement and hesitation. "There is a cave," one of the boys shouted, pointing into the deep brush. "A secret Fong Kong bunker from the days of the Great Revolt. We are going on an adventure." Joshua looked toward the thicket. He felt a strange, discordant frequency emanating from the shadows. To the children, it looked like a beckoning archway. To Joshua, it looked like a tear in the fabric of reality. As the children prepared to enter, a man stepped out from the foliage. He was unremarkable, a man in his 50s, dressed in a simple, clean tunic, his face etched with a worn, grandfatherly smile. He didn't look like the Khe Bien Tai, deviant, or the mad old man that the village mothers warned about. He looked kind. "What are you children doing here?" the man asked, his voice as smooth as olive oil. "We found a cave, uncle," a young girl exclaimed. "We're going to explore it." The man's smile widened, but his eyes remained static, reflecting no light. "Ah, it is a dangerous place. There are bats and stinging insects inside. You should go home to your mothers. It is almost sunset." His request was reasonable, yet it carried an unnatural weight. The children, usually rebellious and stubborn, found themselves nodding in unison. Their curiosity vanished as if it had been wiped clean from their minds. "Will you go inside, uncle?" Joshua asked, stepping forward. He was now a man of 25, his presence towering over the stranger. The man turned to Joshua, his smile never faltering. "Yes, it is my home. I have prepared many wonderful things inside, sweets and toys. Perhaps you will all come and visit me another day? I would see your home now," Joshua said, his voice dropping into a register that made the birds in the trees go silent. The man's smile twitched. He bowed slightly and stepped back into the darkness of the cave. "Another time, son of Mary, the door is always open for those who are lost." He vanished into the black mouth of the earth. The children scattered, suddenly eager to reach their homes. Joshua stood before the thicket until the moon rose. But the man did not emerge. 10 years later, after the start of his ministry, Joshua returned to that same valley with Peter and John. He sought the thicket, but he found only solid rock and tangled thorns. There was no cave, there was no opening. Joshua sought out his grandfather, an old man with a memory like a weathered scroll. "Grandfather, do you remember the cave in the southern thicket? The one where the kind man lived?" The old man frowned, his eyes clouding with confusion. "There has never been a cave there, Joshua. That hillside is solid stone, and no man has lived in those woods since the days of the prophets. You must have dreamt it." Joshua looked at his disciples. Their faces were clear, but the faces of the children from his youth were now a blur in his mind. As if a suang mist had settled over those memories. He understood then that the kind man was not a man at all, but a Vong Lin apparition, a tempter that created doors where none existed, luring the innocent into a space between worlds. He offered sweets, Joshua whispered to himself, but he served only emptiness. He realized that the greatest danger in the world wasn't the monster that roared, but the shadow that smiled and offered a way out of the sun. The cave was a trap for the soul, a phantom realm that preyed on the curiosity of the pure. Joshua prayed for the children he had seen that day, hoping his presence had been enough to break the man's spell, for he knew that in the darkness, the uncle was still waiting, sitting in a cave that didn't exist, offering treats that would never satisfy. Part 5. The Mouth of the Mountain and the Sacrifice. In the final year before his baptism in the Jordan, Joshua witnessed a ritual of ignorance that would haunt the local shepherds for generations. High on a ridge known as Yama no Kuchi, the mouth of the mountain, there was a small, horizontal crevice that the locals believed was a sentient deity. To appease the mountain, the village youths would occasionally perform a cruel experiment. They would take a small animal, a chudo, rabbit, or lamb, tie a long measuring cord to its leg, and force it into the hole. Joshua arrived just as the village boys were shoving a brown rabbit into the dark. They had 50 cubits of cord. "If it comes out the other side," they laughed, "the mountain is pleased. If not, the mountain has eaten." Joshua watched as the cord began to unspool. At first, it moved slowly. Then, suddenly, the cord whizzed out of the boy's hand with a terrifying velocity, as if something at the bottom of the world had grabbed it. A sickening crunch echoed from the depths. Moments later, a sound like a gurgle erupted from the hole. The boys pulled the cord back. What emerged was not the rabbit. It was a pile of small, bleached white bones, clean, as if every shred of flesh had been dissolved in an instant. The boys fled in horror, screaming of demons. Joshua remained. He walked to the mouth and thrust a staff of olive wood deep into the hole. "You take what is given in cruelty," Joshua proclaimed, "but you shall never taste the life of the righteous." He knew that the mouth was a physical manifestation of the earth's greed, a Vuch Tham, abyss, that fed on the malice of men. He didn't hate the mountain, he hated the hearts that thought a life could be traded for luck. As he left the ridge, he felt the weight of the world's sacrifices, all the innocent things pushed into the dark to satisfy a fear they didn't understand. He looked at his own hands and knew that soon, he would be the one the world pushed into the dark. But unlike the rabbit, the mouth would not be able to digest him. Final outro for the 22minute journey. Joshua's silent years were not spent in quiet meditation alone. They were a journey through the literal and spiritual underworld of the Levant. He faced the starving dead, the mudman of despair, the smiling phantoms of the thicket, and the hungry mouth of the earth. He mastered the darkness so that when his time came, he could walk into the ultimate cave, the tomb, and emerge with the keys of death and Hades. The shadows are many, but the light is one. Thank you for exploring these forgotten chronicles. If you have felt the chill of the abyss and the warmth of the light, like and subscribe. Join us next time as we uncover the lost miracles of the Galilee shore. Until then, remember, do not look too long into the cave, for the light is already standing behind you.